All right, thanks everybody for joining us. We're going to take you through Amazon Comprehend. Amazon Comprehend is a relatively new AWS service. We launched it at last year's reInvent in 2017. Comprehend is a fully managed, we like to call it a fully managed, continuously trained NLP service. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. My name is Nino Bice, and I'll be joined today with Ben Snively, who's one of our service architects here in the platform. So real quick, before I dive into Comprehend, one of the things I like to do is kind of do a little bit of the "you are here" slide. This is just a quick summary of our AWS ML Stack. So the way to sort of read this slide is that we offer customers a choice, so they can jump in and use our frameworks and our infrastructure components and build all of their own machine learning based solutions at that level if that's what they need for their use case. We offer what we call platform services, so things like Amazon SageMaker would be here, where you can effectively use a service to train models, deploy and host those models. And then we have another layer in our stack, which is another choice for customers, called the application services. And an easy way to think about these application services is what we did is we thought about the most popular patterns for customers for machine learning, and we pre-train models. And we have teams behind these services that make them not only pre-trained so they're accurate and they work for the use case, but they're also fully managed, right? So they're available as a simple API, and developers and engineers can just get started using them and building these features into their applications. So here's where you'll see Comprehend, and of course some of the Comprehend sister services like Transcribe, Poly, and of course Recognition. So that's a little bit of the options that customers have, and a little bit of where you can find Comprehend. So just to kind of do a quick, another quick overview, Comprehend sits within a family of, it's that top stack. It sits within a family of application services. And we like to think of these as, rich and powerful language capabilities, things that, like I said, just you can quickly add these features to your application. So just a quick summary of those. We have Transcribe, which converts speech to text. So you might have a solution where you want to, you've got a bunch of data, really important data coming over, for example, like the phone, right? So maybe this is in your call centers or live interactions with customers. Now you can actually convert that data into text, and of course process it with Comprehend. We've got Translate, so you can do business in more countries, reach more customers through the power of translation, which is a really nice new service we have. Poly basically gives you lifelike speech from text. So they've seen some really nice wins there where, customers are adding Poly to, for example, news articles. And then if their customers don't want to read those news articles, they can have them read out loud to them. So really nice service there. Of course, Comprehend, we'll dive into that today. And Lex sits in the family of language services, which is our chatbot platform as well. So let's dive into Comprehend. So Comprehend, like I said, it's a fully managed, continuously trained service that helps you extract insights from text. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. Fully managed means that it is available as an API. It's just a simple REST API. Every Comprehend feature is behind a simple REST API. The service, comes fully integrated in the AWS SDK, and we run it for you, right? So we are responsible for ensuring that API is available, and that it's available to you every time you want to call it for your application. Continuously trained, we'll talk in depth around what this means, but it essentially means that this is a service that is consistently getting better. So, we don't approach things like entity extraction or sentiment with fixed rules. These are actually neural models that we're continuously looking at ways that we can collect more data, understand customer use cases, and more importantly, train the model, train the service to get better for you. So we like to think of it as it's a living, breathing service that we're offering to you. And then we'll talk specifically about what extract insights means. So here are the core capabilities of Comprehend. These are the 5, think of them as the 5 feature areas or 5 APIs that we offer. We've got a pretty aggressive roadmap this year, but here are the things we'll talk about today. Sentiment is largely, is a snippet of text, like a comment or a review or a document. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? Which means there's no sentiment, or does it have mixed sentiment? So we have a lot of customers that are using this to understand what their customers are saying about their brands or products. Entities, we have a named entity recognition API. This API goes through text and it looks for things like people, or it looks for things like organizations, or it looks for things like commercial items, right? So, so realistically, a customer could go through data and understand, okay, what were all the people that were mentioned, and were my products mentioned? And then you can imagine the power of associating this with the sentiment API, so you can effectively understand who was talking about you, what were the products they were mentioning, and were they largely happy or not? So really good sort of insight and signal. We have a key phrase API, which is largely thought of as a noun phrase API. And again, don't worry about memorizing. I'll show you guys an example of these APIs. We have a language identification API. So the API, you could submit text to it and it will return back to you what it thinks the language is. We support up to 100 of those today. For sentiment entities and key phrases, we support English and Spanish. And then finally, we have a topic modeling API. Topic modeling API is essentially LDA as a service. And we'll show an example of that. But topic modeling allows you to go through a broader corpus of documents and organize them based on term frequency or keyword frequency. So largely you can understand, like, hey, yesterday we had, for example, 1,000 customer incidents reported. Topic modeling would help you organize those into 10 topics or 20 topics that would help you understand what customers were saying across that broader corpus. So here's a little bit of just a visual, example of what we sort of walk through here. So on the left is an example snippet of information. On the right-hand side is some of the output you'd expect the service to give you. So of course you can see named entities like Amazon's in there, Seattle's in there. You've got dates, you've got people like Jeff Bezos. You've got the key phrase API is getting all the other noun-based phrases like our customers or books and blenders. So again, you're really sort of getting that extraction from that unstructured text. You're understanding what it's about. Of course, we think the sentiment's positive here because we think customers love buying everything. I know I love buying everything. I can't buy everything, but I do. And then, of course, it's in English. So the language API is actually really powerful. We see it used quite a bit. So if your business or if your application deals, in a multilingual context, you have customers from all around the world. This API is really powerful. It helps you understand, like, what is the language in which they're speaking to you, so you can understand what's in the unstructured text. So here's a quick example of topic modeling. And again, we'll look at this a little deeper, but topic modeling, like I said, essentially it returns to you topic groups. So you'll have groups 0, 1, 2 represented that way. You'll have terms, like these are keywords that are most relevant and within the topic, and then you'll have the weight. So you'll know, like, in topic 0, Washington is pretty strongly weighted in terms of the relevance it has to topic 0. And again, this sort of helps customers sort of organize documents and information. Popular use cases for this are customer feedback. I've even seen customers do support incident triage. Or even do understanding what kinds of comments people are leaving on a website. So, one of the key things, we talked about when we started is it's continuously trained. And I thought this slide does a really good job helping you understand all of the work that essentially you or your team would have done yourselves if you took on NLP and you consistently trained NLP. And this sort of shows all of the value that Comprehend's providing. So this slide's a little busy, but let's walk through it a little bit, right? So the first step of really any model, but essentially training an NLP model is collecting data, right? So you're crawling the web, you might have data from an internal data warehouse, you might even have to go buy some of this data yourself, right? So you have to go get the data to train your NLP model, to train your neural network. And then, of course, from there, you essentially need to prepare this data. You need to annotate it. You need to evaluate it. Like, I know our team alone spends a lot of time on this phase because data is always not perfect, especially the good data, right? The good data, like from website reviews or comments, or even Amazon.com's own comment feedback stream. We have to prepare and cleanse this data. It comes in different formats, comes in different lengths, right? It has words or even markup, like HTML markup that you have to remove, right? So so the team focuses a lot on this. This is what we mean by continuously training. Step 3 is obviously modeling the data, right? So we have to build a model, we have to experiment, we have to go back and forth, we have to change the weights and measures to understand that the model is performing the way that it's expected to perform. So for example, if we're doing named entity recognition and the model's not catching all of the people, for example, in our training set, we'll have to go back and find out why, and we'll have to update our algorithm, and we might even have to go back to step number 1 and get more data that sort of represents people in certain contexts. So this is sort of how to think about that, and then deploy, right? So once you train a model and it's good and you have the skill set to do that and you have the data to do that, you have to go host this thing somewhere, right? So now you're provisioning infrastructure, you're thinking about how to scale that infrastructure or those instances of the models to handle a certain number of requests per second, right? So we think about all these things and we do these things for you. So when we talk about, we just sort of simply wrap these in an API, this is really what we're doing. This is the value prop behind that exercise. And then of course this continues, right? So it's data changes, context of information changes. There could be new entity types that we're adding to have broader coverage for our customers. So this loop, this feedback process is just really continuous, right? We have a full-time team that handles managing these pipelines of collecting, annotating, and training these models. We've got a full-time team, of course, that's running these models at scale and ensuring we could support all the requests per second. And this is a continuous living, breathing thing. So let's actually dive in really quick. Let's just take a quick break, and we're going to open the Comprehend portal for those of us that have access. The service is mostly a developer service. Like I said earlier, available through REST APIs, but we do have a kind of a really neat portal that kind of helps us understand the concepts a little bit better. So we'll jump to that now. Okay, so here we are in the AWS Management Console. I would have navigated to the AWS Management Portal in general, and then if you don't see Comprehend show up, just do a quick search for it. But here's the home page. Here you can kind of understand a little bit more about the service, see pricing. Oh, and just while we're here, let's talk about pricing. So Comprehend is actually really price competitive amongst its peers, but you should go do your own diligence there. And we charge by the character, right? So we charge a minimum request of 300 characters, which you could think of it as letters or single unit things, and then we after that have a very small incremental charge for every 100 characters. But again, I urge you to go bring your use case, bring the volume of data, run it against our model, and you can sort of anticipate what the service will cost. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'll hit try Amazon Comprehend. And here you can see, which is essentially a WYSIWYG representation of our API surface area. So in this example, what you have here is the sample text I talked about earlier. You can go ahead and paste anything you want in here, up to 1,000 characters. And so you can go paste, go get like a customer support comment that someone gave you, or go look at a review that a customer left recently, or even a tweet, or go get, a couple paragraphs from a document, paste it in. And it's a visual representation of the API. So, in this case, let me stick with the sample code, or sample text that we have. And if I scroll down here, you can see that we've broken the responses across the 4 APIs. And we'll talk about topic modeling separate. But you can see here, these are the entities that we're returning, right? So again, for that sample text, you can see here's the organizations. This is Boeing's an organization. Jeff Bezos is a person. You can see Portland is a location. Confidence will be returned to you, which is essentially our model's confidence that it's correct, right? So you could think of that as sort of a QA waterline. You can actually see the JSON response object itself. So this is actually what will be returned to you when you use the API. So you can kind of just go look at that and figure out how you want to build your application. And then you can over here hover over and you can look at things like sentiment, right? So, in this particular case, it feels like a pretty neutral comment, but if I go up here and I say something like, I love my new Nikes, I just got a pair of tennis shoes, right? So I click analyze. I'll jump back over to sentiment, and you can see here, like, okay, this is actually really confident that it's a positive statement, which it is, right? So you can really play with the service to understand how it works, how sentiment works, how entity extraction works, and of course, you can look at the JSON response objects just to kind of help to design your application a little easier for you. The other thing that we have in the portal, which is kind of nice, and for anybody on the portal that's done a topic modeling implementation, like LDA, for example, latent derelict allocation, you'll really appreciate this, because typically this process starts with, going and getting a model, tuning the model, hosting the model, first, training it, hosting it. What we've essentially done is we've wrapped LDA behind a simple to use API. Right. So, in this particular case, right in the portal, this is actually not even sample. This is a production job you could define. So you can just simply give it a name. Let's say fictional scenarios that we want to go through a bunch of customer feedback and categorize it or classify it into 10, topics, right? So what you can do here is you can simply give the job a name. You could point to where that data sits in an S3 bucket. You can specify the delineation. So you might have a file that has every customer comment is in its own unique text file, or every customer comment is in one single document, but it's one comment per line. And then you can say, this is a key thing around the parameters of the algorithm itself, is you could specify how many topics to organize, these documents into, right? And this really actually lends itself to dealing with sort of the word density and polarity across these topics. So, for example, if you want 10 topics, then you'll see 10, let's say there's 1,000 documents. They'll be organized into 10 groups, 10 topics, and then each of those groups will be defined by a set of keywords. In this case, the service returns the top 10 keywords. So this is kind of a way to sort of play with this to understand the polarity of which makes sense to you for your use case. And then, of course, we simply ask you for an S3 location of where you can dump the result set. And what's really nice, again, I wrote no code, and I just basically organized a bunch of documents, using a latent derelict allocation model. And so the last but least, of course, is just to give yourself permission to read and write from those buckets themselves. So you'll create a job, you'll wait a few moments for that job to run, and then you can go look at the result sets here in the form of a CSV file. So this is just a quick overview of sort of, what the portal has. A lot of customers love it. It's a nice way to learn the service, to try the service. I'd recommend starting here. I'd recommend accessing our samples in our documentation and in the SDK, just sort of as a primer a little bit. So at this point, let's jump back into the deck. Okay, so now that we've talked about Comprehend as the API, right, as sort of, you can almost think of it as like a developer service, but what do you do with it? How do you think about using Comprehend? How do we complete the picture? So we like to start to think about Comprehend really enables AWS text analytics. So you could go use Comprehend and the associated APIs in an application on its own, or you could use it in context of an analytics project. So for example, if your team is responsible for every day understanding what customers are saying about your brand, service, or product, obviously Comprehend will do a great job helping you analyze that unstructured content by doing entity extraction and sentiment. But that's not done. That's not the solution. The solution will largely have a number of parts around where do you store the data? How do you build a data pipeline to move the data around and call Comprehend APIs to transform unstructured text into structured text? Now that structured text is structured, where do you put it? How do you analyze it? You might want to have a visual plotting and charting component or tool, right? So now, all of these things together is what we like to think of as text analytics. We'll dive into some of the most common patterns here. So the popular use cases that we see from our customers are things like, imagine, like I said, that orchestration of components. The popular use cases are largely driven by content personalization. So we have a lot of customers that are publishing a lot of content every day, and they want to understand what they're publishing. They want to understand content maybe they didn't publish, but that they're actually ingesting, so that they can understand it and then recommend it to their customers. We have a lot of ad marketing tech companies that are doing this. So they could say, hey, we're responsible for marketing for a certain brand. We just saw a tweet that's really positive. So first we know that, which is great. Now we're going to go get that and then go remarket it on behalf of our customer. So you can think of this like content awareness and personalization use cases. We have semantic search, which is a big use case. So, for example, you might use a service like Elasticsearch, and you'll run all of the documents prior to being indexed in Elasticsearch through Comprehend to extract entities and key phrases for boosting and ranking of the results. Right? This is a very popular pattern with Elasticsearch with various NLP tools. We have a lot of customers that are also coming to us and saying, hey, we just want to, quote, an intelligent data warehouse. We want to have a data warehouse where we don't need to think about, we want to put semantic knowledge, if you will, over that unstructured data in our data warehouse, in our data lake. So, for example, you can run Comprehend over your data lake and semantically know what's in it. You can know what data contains people. You can know what data contains mentions of an organization or a brand or a service or a product. You can understand what data contains locations, right? So it's really nice to sort of understand sort of what's in unstructured data. And then more importantly, you can start to join that unstructured data with structured data. So for example, you could say, okay, let me understand where all the data that mentions organizations is in my data lake. And then let me join that with some of our, advertising campaign data. And so that can really help you understand, like, oh, it turns out when we spend this much money in advertising, customer feedback represents that based on organization mentions and comments or tweets, right? So you can start to see these intelligent or smart data warehouse patterns emerging. And then, of course, social analytics, right? So customers might want to build a pipeline. They might have pull on tweets, Facebook posts, and kind of a similar process, right? Like understand what's being talked about, what's the sentiment, and then let me understand and plot and chart that to understand trends over time, right? So we see a lot of customers building things like this along, combining not just Comprehend, but other storage and analytics services across AWS. So to kind of help land that point, let's just sort of take a quick look at this chart. So this chart, encapsulates on the left-hand side, if you will, we'll follow it left to right. You really have the new data types that are being generated, right? So, it's interesting, as recent as maybe 5-10 years ago, some of our customers still on-prem, they're saying, hey, look, it's really expensive with, storage solutions on-prem to just go store anything. Like we wouldn't just go say, hey, let's go index every tweet for the last 2 years, or let's go crawl the web and index every article that mentions us over the last 3 years. Like these are pretty expensive, sort of storage mediums and storage use cases if you aren't sure how you're going to productize that data. Right, but what's been amazing is S3 has really brought the cost of that storage down. So we see a lot of our customers storing much, much more unstructured data, which of course increases the Comprehend value prop and the usefulness to customers. So what you can see here is we, architecturally, I guess, or marketecturally, if you will, in the slide, you can see Comprehend really sits above S3 in terms of helping customers interpret and search and make sense of data, unstructured data in S3. And then, like I was mentioning with those mentions of use cases and using these components together to build a text analytics solution or workload, you'll see sort of how customers are using some of these services. So Kinesis is, you can do things like, hey, let's go get all the tweets in near real time and then set a threshold for negative sentiment against our brand or service. Or let's go use Amazon Elasticsearch and go do things like, boost ranking and results semantically, or do rich filtering based on people. Another example is let's go, use Redshift or Aurora and let's go make sense of unstructured data. And then when we make sense of it, we extract things like entities or key phrases or even sentiment. Let's go join that with other structured data in our data warehouse. So for example, we can see how effective our ad marketing campaigns have been over time. And then, of course, we can also use things like other parallel platforms like Elastic MapReduce or Amazon EMR to do things like, K-means clustering over entity results, or Spark, use Spark SQL to analyze some of the result sets. And we'll go into a little detail on that. So to kind of drive home the text analytics patterns, let's give a couple of concrete examples here. So in this particular case, and by the way, everything I'm showing you today are officially published AWS Comprehend blog content. So you can go do a quick search for Comprehend in Glue or Comprehend, you'll see the next one, RDS, and you can see amazing step-by-step examples of, the idea, the architecture, code samples, and then both of them are quickly have formation template, deployment, quick links. So you can go deploy and run everything I'm showing you right now yourself with no code. So in this particular case, like I said earlier, Comprehend's typically invoked as part of a pipeline. So Glue, if you don't know yet, is an AWS native ETL pipeline tool. And in this case, what we're going to do, and there's a fictional scenario behind this architecture, but we're going to pull in some reviews. This would be unstructured content from S3. Glue will do that. It will request the document. It will send it to Comprehend using a Spark UDF, user-defined function. And once that response comes back, which is essentially the sentiment in this case for that document, it then gets written back to S3, right? So just those 3 steps right there are really easy to do and fun to do in Glue, and it's something you can easily go implement code-free by following this blog example. And of course, from there, just to kind of finish it, Glue as a crawler to go populate its catalog. And then in this particular example, when you go to the blog, you'll see how they use Athena to query the S3 bucket to go do things like showing sentiment over time, right, based on what was extracted from these comments on a BI dashboard, right? But this is sort of a nice example of, we pulled in data as unstructured, we processed with ETL pipeline, and then we visualize the results, right? So you should go learn more and follow the blog. I mentioned quickly the UDF to call Comprehend. Here's a quick example. You can see how easy it is. We are integrated with the Boto 3 client in the AWS SDK. So in this particular case, and all this code, by the way, is in this blog, as I mentioned. But you can see how easy it is to basically, using a batch semantics to go get a document or a body of text, send it to the Comprehend API, and then return that sentiment back. So again, if you're familiar with concepts like user-defined functions, if you're familiar with things like the Boto client, like these would be really easy implementations to make for your use case. So another, we think, popular use case, and again, has really rich blog content behind it, is Comprehend and RDS, Amazon's relational data service, relational database. So what's really nice about this one is you can think about, you can throw the whole, of course, your Aurora MySQL instance sitting in a VPC, but what's the key thing about this demo is that you can call Comprehend, you can take like a string of text, fired from a stored procedure. Every time a new string of text is written, you can fire a stored procedure, call a Lambda function that essentially takes that string of text right out of a column, sends it to Comprehend, processes it so you can get entities or sentiment, whatever you want, and bring those back and then write those back into the relational table. So with this very simple constructs around stored procedures, you could use a Lambda function, which I'll show you, it's very easy to write. You are now basically taking unstructured strings of text in relational databases, and you're making sense of them. So for example, if one of the columns contains a bunch of customer comments, that maybe you had an application or a form that was persisting results there, right? Or just any string in general, you can actually go process it with Comprehend, bring the results back, and then imagine how powerful that is when you're joining. You can now do things right with a basic SQL query. You can understand, what was trending like over the last couple of weeks, or let me correlate trends associated with marketing spending that maybe is in another database or another table. So it brings a lot of these powerful semantics of building relational applications, but it allows you to integrate, a machine learning model, in this case, an NLP machine learning model, very easy using constructs that you know. I quickly mentioned the stored procedure. We just wanted to kind of show you, this is literally how easy it is. So here you can see that, I wrote a Sprock and it triggers every time I write a new record, and then it calls a Lambda function, which, I'm hosting, of course, in Lambda. So, again, I urge you to go do a search for Comprehend and RDS. It's a beautiful blog that Ben Snively wrote, and it has all the code samples, takes you through step by step. And then, of course, like I said, you can do formation template deployment. But with that said, let's actually do that today during this webinar. Let's go step through this particular example. So at that point, let me introduce you to Ben Snively, a principal service architect on the AWS platform that wrote this particular demo. And Ben, why don't you take it away, please?
Great. Next, let's go ahead and step through this example. What we're going to show first is a web front end connecting to our RDS. This web front end, we happen to be using PHP MyAdmin, but really could be any of your applications or any type of web front end into your RDS or a database. What we have here within the database is we already have a table defined. This is representing review data. And if we take a look, this really easily could be sediment, but you could also do all types of natural language processing on this. For example, you could be pulling out entities and making that part of the enriched data and other data sets. But for this example, we have these three fields: the review ID, the review text, and the sediment. What we're going to do next is we're going to show you how this works. So let's go ahead and insert a row. We're going to just very simply insert a row into that table and run this. And this just says, I love this integration. You'll notice we didn't actually enter the sediment information here. What we'll notice if we go ahead and look at the data though, we see the two columns that we just inserted, the ID and the text, but we also see the sediment. It's a positive sediment. And this was actually retrieved through the Lambda integration calling comprehend to pull that sediment information. This very easily, as I mentioned earlier, could be additional information such as the entities, the key phrases, and really any of the calls that our language services provide. To show another example, let's go ahead and enter quite a bit more information. We're going to insert 8 more rows here. So let's go ahead and run this. And right away, if we go ahead and switch to the table here, we'll see all the different sediments automatically populated through that integration that you're seeing. So next, let's go ahead and step through how this is working. So this was a quick demonstration. So how's this really working under the covers? The first way it works is there's essentially a trigger. This trigger is set up anytime a data gets inserted into this table, it calls this trigger. And if we take a look at the trigger, all it does is calls a stored procedure or a function or a procedure that we have in our Aurora database. So let's go ahead and take a look at that procedure next. If we take a look at that procedure, we'll notice this is where we're calling the Lambda function, the AWS Lambda call. A couple things to call out here. One, you'll notice this is an async call. So what this is doing is it's actually going in here, calling Lambda. As soon as it calls the Lambda successfully, it's returning from the flow so the insert completes. So this is an insert call, and it's calling Lambda with the review ID and the review text. So to finish stepping through that flow, next, if we go ahead and take a look at Lambda, what we see here is the actual Lambda function we're calling. So this is going to load here in a moment, and we'll notice down here in the code, this is a few lines of code, about a dozen lines of code, we're actually adding this capability. And just in a very few lines here, we're able to pull in the text information that's getting called from that procedure, call the comprehend the text sediment here. Again, this could be many other types of calls within the comprehend API. And we're pulling out the sediment and doing the insert here. So in these few lines of code here, we're actually inserting the data back into the database. What you could also do is, let's say you have a whole bunch of data getting inserted and you want to really limit the parallelism of this call. Down at the very bottom here, you'll notice I set a max parallelism of 5 here. And since this is an asynchronous call, what happens is the Lambda is actually buffering this, all these calls up as it's getting invoked. Even though I invoked 7 calls there in parallel, it's actually buffering all those up. And what we can see down here is we'll see the concurrency always peaked at 5, and we were throttled a little bit here. But since it is asynchronous, even though it's throttled, it keeps retrying. And that's why within the actual data set here, we actually had all the data populated because it does those automatic refreshes that auto retries. So very, very easily, we were able to set up that entire flow here to be able to run that, do the ingestion, call the Lambda function, have the protections in place so we don't get overflowed on our database again, and insert that sediment information.
All right. Well, Ben, thanks so much for taking us through that. Again, it's really fun to see how using, whether you're using Glue or whether you're using RDS, right? We really just walked through a set of user-defined functions and stored procedures, right? And you've effectively brought in the power of a continuously trained NLP service, right? So it's fun to see what you can do with Comprehend, and for text analytics. So again, we want to say thank you to our customers. Thanks for everybody watching right now. Like I said, if anything, just take an action item to go check out the links to the blogs we've mentioned. They have great examples. They're very detailed. I love doing them. They're nice step-by-step guides. And they really help drive home these concepts that help you to help you bootstrap your own text analytics project. We have a forum. You could tweet right directly at us. We'd love to hear from you, see the things you're building. Our next big event is at the New York City Summit in mid-July. So for anybody in that area or attending, come on up and say hi to us. We'll be doing a talk there as well. So thanks again, everybody, and can't wait to see what you build with Amazon Comprehend.